Garbage dumping remains rampant, and those pictures in your binder are just as fresh as December of 2007. You know, and unfortunately, I have to tell you that it looks a lot worse in the field than it does in those photos. This area has also become a favorite spot for pot growers and people who like to four-wheel in the mud, and we are constantly incurring additional management expenses related to these type of activities. You know, based on the situation and our experience here since December of 1999 managing this property, we firmly believe that non-industrial timberland owners living on site can much more effectively manage access in and around this wild and scenic river corridor. Furthermore, after sale of the parcels, the Hawthorne Timber Company is left with a much more defensible perimeter and something that we can manage effectively from our location in Fort Bragg. Alan, could I have the other board, please? There was some discussion at the Planning Commission meeting about the viability of parcels for timber production, and so I think that it's very important to note that parcels of this size, 160 acres, are ideal candidates for a non-industrial timber harvest management plan, or an NTMP, and particularly when the parcels are located in close proximity to local and regional milling facilities. The properties in question are literally 2 miles down the road from the Branscombe facility, and just as we said, 10 miles to the 101 corridor, and you have access to a variety of mills that utilize different species, and they make different products all the way down to the northern part of Sonoma County up into the markets of Humboldt County. And so particularly with the cost of fuel and the effect on haul, the proximity of these parcels is ideal. Also on that note, if I could flip this. I'd also like to point out that residential footprints in the forested landscape do not necessarily preclude their continued management for timber production. And this is just a very crude example to demonstrate that on a 160-acre parcel, a 1-acre house footprint, which is not atypical, and I think it's what the tax rate is based on, represents only 0.6% of that entire parcel. Hence, you have 99.4% of the remaining 160 acres to manage for timber production and harvest and contribution to the local economy. In closing, I would like to mention that this project is part of a much larger effort to true up and maintain both defensible and operationally feasible ownership boundaries. We recently met with county staff to review Hawthorne's plans, and we're grateful for both their assistance and their knowledge as we seek to resolve both this and several other land use issues that we currently have on the table. With that, I want to thank you again for this forum and this opportunity for the appeal, and we appreciate your consideration, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have now or later in the session. Thank you.
I believe there are some questions.
Yes, sir.
Supervisor Dilworth?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Levesque, 160-acre parcel that you have up here, that you said it would be good for a non-industrial timber program. What is the cost of developing a timber harvest plan for a parcel of that size?
An NTMP for that property. Forgive me because I'm not necessarily dealing on that side of the fence all the time, but I believe that I would think that you're probably in the neighborhood of anywhere from $25,000 to $50,000.
I'd say you're probably conservative.
Okay.
And so what I'm struggling with is 160-acre parcel. Landowner dumps 50 grand into doing a THP. The payback is really tough on a small parcel like that. It's unfortunate. It's not your fault. It's what the state of California has done to the bureaucracy has done to getting through a process. When we're trying to responsibly harvest trees and manage a forest, there's no way a landowner can afford to do that. So what we're left with is trees the forests that aren't being properly managed, because in order to do that, we got to go through all that paperwork. So the economic size of the parcel becomes worse and worse as we drop down into the 160s as opposed to 1,500 acre parcels.
I understand you lose some economies of scale.
A lot of economies
There's no question about that. I do think, though, that folks that are interested in going down the NTMP path generally have a very long-term view. Matter of fact, all of us in forestry tend to have a very long-term view, just because it takes a long time for the trees to come online. As we look forward, we see there's actually a lot more opportunity for small non-industrial landowners to achieve and sustain regulatory relief as opposed to what we generally have to deal with on the industrial harvest side. And I think there's some very good examples out there with the Fish and Wildlife Service working with northern spotted owls, on properties in and around 10 Mile. But I grant you that it's, and I would also say that I think when you get down to the 40 or 60 or 80 acre, then that is supremely challenging. One of the facts that I tried to bring forward is that the proximity to the local milling facilities is tremendous, and that provides an opportunity and discounts the cost tremendously when you look at, say, shipping that log up to Eureka versus 2 miles down the road.
That's assuming that the mill's still in operation,
That's correct, sir. They are temporarily shut down.
and hopefully they will come back. But the trucking is not the big expense, as you know. You're in the business, and I know what we went through to get a long-term management plan, non-industrial plan, and it was a lot of money at that point in time, and that was a number of years ago, and it's just gotten considerably worse. I'm struggling with the loss of timberlands in this county, particularly big swaths that are sold off to conservation groups and locked up and not harvested at all. That's the part that really irritates me, is when I see big chunks of our timberlands in this county being sold off and easements put on and not managed for timber anymore, and that's what's causing our mills to shut down. That's the part that I'm struggling with, and this, to me, the exacerbation of that problem is what I'm seeing as a potential with this.
Can I, would you mind if I respond?
No, please.
I mentioned the client's long-term objectives for the property, and matter of fact, I was just in Portland last Friday meeting with the client representative, and we talked about the long-term future of this property, and this is part of the reason that we are engaged in this activity right here. We are on a mission to make this approximately 113,000 acre block as viable as a long-term timber investment as we can. And as you pointed out, these are very challenging times to make that happen. And when you look at a property this size, 113,000 acres, and you're trying to make it a long-term investment, you look at, like I mentioned, a variety of the other, land access issue, property line issues, right-of-way, easements. All those things speak to asset value, and they add certainty to the asset. You also look at situations like this, where you have a piece of property that does not contribute significantly to the long-term sustained yield, and yet it has a disproportionately high management cost. And so while we, in some ways, I want you to know that we are in line with your goal of maintaining a viable, vibrant timber industry here, but it doesn't mean that in today's economic reality we can continue to manage each and every single acre that we have. And in properties like this, where we are challenged by the fact that they are located and surrounded by the adjacent land use. Now, we talked about the additional parcels. We could be selling parcels here south of the river too if we so choose. That is not our intent. Our intent was to dispose of the property, for the most part, north of the river, and pretty much keep everything south of the river for us, making a more contiguous, more easily efficient property to manage. So it's not like we're whole-scale disposing of, breaking this whole thing up into